All right, we're on air. Welcome to another open source office hours. We'll kick it off with some announcements, or at least Nate, you have some cool stuff to share, right?
Yeah, my stuff's short and sweet, but basically I've been working on making ShareJS more scalable. We started out mostly just kind of hammering something out that would work, and the OT code has been pretty mature for a long time, but a lot of the other stuff is still, kind of beta at this point. In kind of as we've been scaling our app, we've noticed that we've been starting to hit various ceilings in terms of memory or CPU performance. So that's actually what I'm spending most of my time on right now. And as of yesterday, got to the point where instead of creating basically an internal stream per document, which if you have queries that return many, many documents, which in our app we do, we actually we're working on reducing this, but we have like sessions where you actually have thousands of documents in memory for a particular user, and that's per tab. So on the server, we are creating a stream for every single document to basically handle message tracking around all the things happening on that document. And I basically refactored that code to only do one per every single query, which is much closer to like a reasonable number per client, because usually you only have maybe a dozen queries per client at most. In general, much better. Like memory usage went way down, and performance in terms of CPU is better as well, because just doing less stuff and less garbage collection and all of that. So we were having some issues where processes would get under a lot of load and kind of not perform well for a little while, and fixed a lot of that. And then the next set of changes I'm doing are mostly further optimizations in terms of pub/sub. So making it so that when it checks if something's changed, it has to rerun a query, making that more efficient using Mongo projections. And then also the other big thing I'm doing is making pub/sub more efficient by letting you specify what's effectively like a shard key for pub/sub. So you'll be able to, when a document's being published, say, okay, publish to not only just like the document and like the whole collection, which is how the queries work today, is that they listen to all changes on the whole collection, and then filter out after that. But what it'll do is it'll let you like say like also publish on the collection plus, like in our example, like an account ID, because most of the data is like it's all in one multi-tenant database, but most of the data is only pertinent to a particular account. So my server shouldn't be getting pub/sub about somebody else's account, which just puts a lot more load on the pub/sub system, a lot more network, and a lot more load on the server that's receiving that communication that has to parse those messages. So actually the biggest amount of work that's being done right now is just parsing messages, like JSON parsing, and we want to get rid of all that. So instead, you'll be able to say, like, when you publish, also publish to like this collection plus an account ID, and then when you define a query, you'll be able to say, don't listen to like the whole collection, just listen to like collection plus the account ID for this particular query, if it's in it. So we're going to do that, which it'll be kind of like a generic thing where you can like specify whatever you want to be the extra channels, but that will allow us to get to a much larger level of scale, since right now the system is not super horizontally scalable, and that'll basically solve the number one horizontal problem. So be good. So I should have some quick progress on that. I'm hoping to be done by next week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else have announcements since last week?
Hey.
Yeah.
Hi guys.
Hey.
So one thing that Arthur did just today, actually. It's a Redis Online plugin. Here's the link on it. It's to show that it's just like a simple library, which is not particularly specifically for Derby, but it's useful when you have a cluster and you want to get the list of users who are currently online. So let me send you a link on it. Here it is. And so it basically just sends each 60 seconds. It sends you like a pin from each user, and it sets into a map. It sets that this user is online with an expiration time of 3 minutes, and you can also get the list of all the users that are currently online. So something like this, pretty simple.
Cool.
But we were also thinking about reusing the existing way of tracking clients, and that Racer has. It has actually the clients already, and it's working for the RPC system, right? When you want to do any RPC stuff to push to the client, you can actually grab the list of currently connected clients. But you cannot do it so easily when you have a cluster, because each machine is on different, like each user is on different machines, so you need to gather everyone somehow together to get the whole list of users. So we decided to initially just do it like this simple way, so that each user is pinging the server each minute.
Nice. And did you say it is online or is not online?
Those that are online.
No, I mean the tool that he made.
What do you mean? Yeah, it's. I sent you a link. And I sent it on GitHub. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
We'll look through that. All right. Any other announcements anybody has? Or we could, I know Mateo had a couple questions.
Yeah, we can switch to questions, I think.
Okay. So the first one was it popped out from a problem, and I don't know, it's just an idea about, I think, a new feature or functionality in Derby, which is related to the public subscribe. So the thing we were seeing, and actually we had to modify our source, was using the model.subscribe, okay, to subscribe to changes in documents, to remote documents, and then using model on to react to those changes. The problem for us was that with model.subscribe, you actually had to fetch all the documents. So when we were subscribing into a collection, all the collection was dumped to one end. And in some cases, for our code for our servers, was not so feasible to have all the collection dumped. And so my question was, would be hard or actually possible to implement a subscribe-like function that actually subscribe only to the events and does not fetch all the data from DB?
I mean, it's not really consistent with the way that things work, because like you would be getting events, like the way that the events are propagated right now is by sending you the operations of what happened, and then the operations actually are getting applied to the documents. So we can't really tell you what happened if we don't have the document to apply the operation to, if that makes any sense. I mean, you sort of could, because I guess those things are sort of directly done, but you wouldn't have all the data. You would have like the op includes like specifically, for example, like, oh, you inserted a character into a string, but the event in Racer is like it gives you the string instead of giving you the character, and it also omits the character that was changed too, but it like tells you a little bit more. So it's pretty deeply intertwined with how things work. It also just doesn't actually seem like something you should ever be doing. Like, why are you subscribing to everything in a collection?
Because, for example, if I had to, I don't know, automatically recompute some statistics on a collection, I need to know when something in the collection changes. And I either do it with a timeout, so every 30 seconds I do the statistics, or I may do the statistics just when the collection changes. And we try to do the second way so that we didn't lose time, machine time, and computation power to do it every 30 seconds. But yeah, we found this thing that in our PC, in our development computers, was not a problem. But when we were deploying, in some occasion they were giving problems because the machine that we use for deployment were not so fast. And actually, if the database, if the collection goes above the gigabytes, that for us it's quite normal, then you cannot actually get all the collection down.
Isn't this a job for the dirty queue?
Yeah, it is, though I don't think it's super well documented. But so first of all, what you're talking about is like you're trying to calculate some data that's global, right? So it should be like Racer's designed for clients that are connected to a server that are kind of independent from each other and usually just only interested in a subset of data. Like it's literally designed for web apps, right? It's not designed for the kind of thing you're talking about, which is you're talking about a data streaming like use case where you're trying to calculate global statistics for an entire system. It's very different than the use cases for Racer. So like using the model in general is just like very much the wrong approach because it's like its entire purpose is for like a very different thing where you want a copy of part of the data that you want to do like rich things with, and somebody else might have a copy of a different part of the data that they want to do stuff with. Like you're trying to do like this global operation. So basically like it doesn't make sense to add those features to the model because like the model is just not supposed to be used for stuff like that. You don't want statefulness. You just want like a stream. So the easiest way to just get a stream of everything that's going on, although it's not 100% reliable, is to use the ShareJS middleware. So the way that like we've actually at some point published a Git that shows like a simple hooks implementation based on the middleware, and like the access control stuff is based on the middleware. Really all it is just like a function that gets called on every single operation that goes through the system on that particular process. So that's like the easiest way to hook into things because it just sees the whole stream of everything that goes through it, and you can look at those things and then figure out what to do. A more sort of robust solution would be to use a queue of all of the things that have been modified and then parse through that queue. So for that, we actually have another feature called the dirty queue, where basically, if you turn it on, like as things are writing, another record will get created in Redis. We haven't really done a great job of open sourcing all the tooling around it because it's still pretty immature. We're using it for search indexing right now, and plan on extending it to support our own reporting, where like we calculate stuff based on stuff that gets modified in a different collection. So that's a much more ideal solution. So just to get something working, I would probably use a ShareJS middleware. But the downside to middleware is that if for whatever reason your server crashes in the middle of processing, you don't have a guarantee that you'll ever process that thing. It's kind of like best effort, and you might end up having unprocessed data that gets out of sync. This is, of course, the same problem with a model. Like, it's not any better or worse. It's probably actually better. But a more reliable way of making sure that something actually happens is to use a write-ahead queue, where you like add it before you actually do the write, and then after you are sure that you've processed it, you remove it from that queue. That way, like you're using persistence to guarantee that you actually get around to doing it at some point. So that's kind of the principle behind the dirty queue. So that's a more appropriate way to solve this problem, but I'd probably start with the middleware just as a way to get something done pretty easily.
Yeah, and just another possibility, not something we necessarily recommend, but we have done, is there's a metadata on all snapshots, and it says like when it was last modified. So you could also query that and see if anything's been modified since the last time you pulled.
Yeah, you can like query that in a cron job or something.
Right. So, and that's potentially also a way to like verify maybe like that work has been done or something. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's another.
Yeah, that's a good one. And that can be a good way to. You might want to do both. Actually, you might want to have a hook as things are changing in a middleware, but then run a cron job every so often to just make sure that you didn't miss anything. Is also an approach you can take. So it's kind of like, in a way, similar to the dirty queue. It's just a little more like a little more delayed because you're only doing it every so often. But in principle, it's kind of the same idea. It's like write out some data persistently about what work has been done.
Okay. The other question was related to my module, DerbyJS, which we were using to slowly improve the server side, but then we found some other solutions. So we are not using DerbyJS right now, but I wanted to improve it anyway. And one thing I wanted to improve was that right now the cached page server side is not recomputed neither every 30 seconds or at every page input change. So my question here was if I would like to recompute the cached page server side so that new clients get a new page directly from the server, an updated page. Would be there a function or a way from the page object to render that page?
In short, yeah, but I guess I don't totally understand how we're getting there.
Okay. I will try to explain myself. Basically, I added a patch to Derby so that when there is a page in page.server.js, when Derby does the page.render, you have an event page rendered is emitted with the page and the rendered page. And at that point in my module, I get that event so that I have the page object and the rendered page. I save the rendered page, and the story ends there. My question was, since I also have the page object when the page was rendered, is there a way that I could save that object to use it later for rendering again the same page?
Sort of, but it's the way that code is currently structured, it's really designed to be tied to a request. Like when you call page render, it actually does stuff on the request, and if there's like a problem with the request, it like sends an error response to the request. So it's a bit weird to keep that around in memory because you're responding to the original request. You could like stub that out and basically you basically fake it like by just putting a bunch of methods on it that do nothing. If Derby were to call them, but it's a bit messy. I would question whether you should be doing this in JavaScript. Like JavaScript is really not super ideal for creating a cache of a giant string, which is what a rendered page is. It is really like a much better thing to be doing with Varnish or something that's actually designed to be a cache. Like just in general, JavaScript, well, specifically V8, I know, uses quite a lot of memory to keep large strings around. So I don't know that you really want to be designing a in-memory page cache. You could write it out to a file and then stream the file, which would perform a lot better and also scale. But frankly, like we're now writing a whole cache server, so why not just use Varnish?
Yeah. No, yeah, of course. My module was like a proof of concept to try and resolve some of our ideas, and for that matter, we actually proved that the cache was okay, but the problem then was in another part, so we resolved in another way. I was just wondering and asking myself if it could
I mean,
be improved. But yeah,
there's
I agree.
Probably something you could do, but I wouldn't super encourage it because it's just like in general, this is not something that I would do in Node. It's like not really the best technology for building a cache. So I would probably recommend people use Varnish, frankly,
Sure.
or something like that. You could build a cache server in Nginx or something too. But just to answer your question more directly, you can call page.get and render the template, and it'll render with the model that's associated with that page. It'll be on page.model. And so you could continue to render the page. You could just call page get, and there's a default template. Like if you look inside of how Derby works, it's actually pretty simple. There's just like a default template that it renders, and that's how it renders. So you could just call that inner method directly instead of calling the render method, and then you could use the results of that to update your cache. So. In short, yes, you can. You can just look at how page renders implemented. It's not actually that long.
No, actually, yeah.
Server, look at how renders implemented, and you could just do what it does. But yeah, the whole thing sounds a bit suspicious to me.
Okay, clear. Yeah, because when you do the page.get inside the render, you also have a namespace, I guess, an S. So that
that's what you pass to page renderer. So you can just pass the same value or do whatever render.
Yeah, but that means that I also need to, of course, to remember also those values. So yeah. There are some.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to, you could like wrap the render method so that you could capture the value or something and like store it on the page, or I don't know. yes, you could hack it, you can make it work, but I just don't.
I would say it's getting creepy. So
Yeah.
maybe it's not the right way.
It's just really not what the method was designed to do, and Node's not the best place to keep a giant cache of strings around. So.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, well, the cache would be, I think, for the string problems, might be useful to use a buffer, a node buffer, so that you will allocate data outside the Node.js heap. And
yeah, the problem is, like, render is just going to create this giant string. So you could then take the string and turn it into a buffer, and then turn the buffer back into strings with the stream, so that. I don't know. It just sounds to me like something where I would use an existing solution, because it's a perfectly good cache already, and it does expire time, and it does all those things.
Of course. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I actually have a question. Where is the best example / documentation of Racer's RPC stuff?
I don't think I ever documented it.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find it. I mean, Pavel, you guys have used it a couple of times. Like, how did you figure it out?
It's in Russian. We have a documentation in Russian.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's in Derby FAQ. Yeah, I can wait 1 second.
I'll try to Google Translate it, or I don't know if you guys want to translate it.
You can read the file. It's not that complicated.
It's really long.
The source isn't too bad.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, I just figured
I just never documented it.
There's definitely been times I was like, oh, this would be cool to try out in this situation.
Yeah, I to be honest, haven't put a lot of time into making sure that it works well, so that's why I didn't document it. But I should probably just document it and then make sure it works well.
See, Google is translating. See what happens.
It's also in English, no? The different folder in the same repository.
Well, we
Not
did
full.
not translate everything in English. Osman started to translate it, but there was no one to help him, so I don't think he
Some
managed
of
to
them is
translate
translated.
everything. Yeah,
Yes.
just some of it is translated. Oh, actually, Osman did translate it. Yeah, there was a translation for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's full.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Nice.
Credits to Osman. He did a very good job translating lots of it.
Sweet. All right. Well, there we go. Thank you.
I put the link to the chapter today.
Yeah. Perfect. Cool. All right. Well, that answers my question. Two-way street. All right. Any other questions?
I have some kind of a architecture question, more of like an architecture question.
Architecture question? Okay.
Yeah, here is a list. So I think Carl Johan, he already left, but he was talking about something similar. He was talking about the way to have an abstraction around the page component. So another thing I wanted to talk about is, should we actually streamline the way to structure the application so that each page is its own component, and we tell people to actually write each page as a separate component?
Yeah, I actually think that is a better way to do it. Though I started doing that when I first started on Derby 0.6, and then I kind of abandoned it midway through because I don't remember why, but there was some issue where things got complicated, and there was like extra stuff that a page had to do, like rendering and whatnot. And what would probably make more sense is for pages to be components, and then for them to just like basically for the component that's being sent to the router to get that extra functionality, like for it to just be like a special component that gets added onto. I think that would be a more clean way to do it, and I don't know, it just was less obvious at the time, so I didn't do it, but I do think that that makes more sense sort of fundamentally. I just haven't I haven't gotten back into that code enough to like figure out like actually how to implement that, but yeah. The other thing is that we used to use like the like underscore page a lot as like a way to basically send data from the route into the app in some way, like into a template directly or into a component, because you would then create a reference to that from kind of the root scope. Whereas components are all in their own scopes, like they're all under like $component dot random ID. It's just like _1 or _52 or whatever it is. The thing I was wrestling with was kind of like how to more conveniently get that data through. So what would be nice is if like maybe I'm literally making this up as I'm talking, so this isn't super well processed, but maybe like the scope of the model in the route, instead of being like the root scope, should actually be the scope of a component, which is the page component. And when you go to the init of the page, it's actually the same scope, so that you don't like have to worry about how to reference that root scope from the controller, from the route in your controller.
Wouldn't your collections be in this component scope now instead of
well, pretty much everything is under $components anyway, in reality. Then the other problem that you kind of have to deal with is that the route runs on the server once and then not on the client, or it runs on the client once, but the components get initialized on both. And the reason for that is basically like the stuff you do in your route might not actually be idempotent. Running it twice might be a problem. And it might do stuff like, redirect you or something like that. Maybe that should actually change, and maybe just the route logic should run on both. The problem is that the route logic like gets the data, and you don't want to get the data twice. Like, we really don't want to do that necessarily. That's where it got a little complicated, and that's where I kind of like gave up a little bit. But it does feel like there should be a way to do this more easily. But basically, the thing is that all of the data inside of like the $component scope actually just gets deleted before the page is rendered, because it gets recomputed in the client. So there's no sense like sending it with the page. It's just like a ton of data that is recomputable. So only the data that's on these like underscore page, or if you make your own thing, gets sent along, and with the rendered content. And so like that's one of the reasons why you like have to set your data on the underscore page on the route, and then the component has to like grab that. So like Derby knows what data to send and what not to send to the client. But it is kind of unnatural for like there's a good reason why it's different, but I'll admit that the API to the programmer is not that great. So it would be nice if it were like you're in your route and you just parse parameters and you set the result, and then like it's the same in the component. You don't have to think about it too hard.
But like usually in route, you set up a bunch of references and like ref lists and stuff. Why don't we just make the underscore page to be the local modal of the page component?
That could work.
Yeah, it's sort of best of both worlds, right? Like, it's really simple to add stuff to underscore page, and then the problem is always like, you essentially would do model.scope underscore page or model.root ref underscore page all the time in the component.
Because underscore page makes sense only on the current page, and when you go to some other route, you lose the underscore page completely, so it's kind of bounded together.
Yeah.
Maybe in the same world, the page component and the underscore page model.
Yeah, that could work. And then page would just be a reference to that component. Because one of the handy things is that there's always an @page available if you ever just want to like make something globally available. So you can, if you have two different components that like want to talk to each other, you can go @page, and it's always defined no matter where you are. And it gets cleaned up because you get a new page every single time you get a render, which is handy in case you don't have to think too much about like global name conflicts. Yeah, that could work. All right, I might try that. Good idea.
Cool.
I'll see if I run into any problems. The only problem I can foresee is that there is still some data that you might compute in the overall page that would end up getting sent to the client that's not strictly necessary. But that's kind of a minor thing and could probably be avoided. I don't foresee that as a big problem. But like, yeah, maybe if you like in your init of your page component, like set a bunch of stuff that's computable, we'll end up like JSON serializing that and sending it to the client, which is not ideal, but that's just then will become kind of a pattern is like, don't do that, basically. But that seems very avoidable by just nesting more components in that component, or by like, I think, actually not sure if it does this right now, but like things like start, for example, could automatically delete their output because, you know, they'll be recomputed again in the client. So, yeah, it's a good idea. I'll look into it.
So you will try to actually make the page to have the same API as the components, and also have the underscore page.
Mostly the same API already, so it shouldn't be that hard. I just like, it was one of those things where I was like trying to do a bunch of stuff to get 0.6 done, and I knew that it seemed a little fishy, but like it wasn't clear the path forward, so I just kind of gave up. I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna get this done. So I generally agree with what you're bringing up. I ran into some issues, and that's why I kind of made it simpler for me. So I'll look into it, but like, this was a good discussion. I feel like this might actually solve the problems that I was running into, but once I get deep in the code, might discover some other small issue that we didn't talk about. But this, yeah, making the underscore page be the scope of that component does seem like it solves the main problem. So I'll look into that.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you.
Nice.
That was helpful.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions or ideas?
Hi guys, I've got a question
Sure.
about wrapper, which wraps a particular property when you send some stuff to the component. If this stuff is some expression or or is a result of some view function, then component wraps it. So the question is there a universal way of dealing with this situation? I mean, distinguishing between what has come to component. Like I should know.
Sort of. Actually, don't. We should probably add this to the documentation. I think we didn't do that. So the what you're talking about, if I understand you correctly, is basically depending on what you specify in an attribute going into a component. So if you give a component an attribute that's like just a string, it just becomes a string. So if it's like, says, if you say, my attribute equals high, then inside of your component, you will, if you look at the model, if you say add get my attribute, it will have the string high, and that's great. And you can also use that that name from the model, or you can use at my attribute in your template, and they'll both be high. But the tricky thing is like what to do if what you put in your attribute isn't something that can actually just be directly put into the model as a value, because it's actually a template expression. So if what you put in there is like a, mustache, and then you say like, curly curly, like some other thing, like you use like hash ID from inside of an each or something, or like hash item dot something something, or you use an expression, then inside of the model, actually what you'll find is a template, because that basically is what you put inside the attribute. And so you'll find that it's this object called parent wrapper, but don't worry too much about that. It's just a template. So it's actually a template object. And if you were to render a template object in your view, it just renders correctly, because that's kind of like how Derby internally passes around templates. Which is why that's what's put inside the model, but inside your controller, you have this wacky object that you don't know how to work with. So there's a function called on every component called getAttribute, which will render an attribute, basically, at that moment. So that's how you do it.
Exactly.
If you call it getAttribute, it returns the rendered attribute, and model get returns the actual, like, whatever you passed in, either a string or a template. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, totally makes sense. And this thing works, like I can get the attribute, but what if I want to then make a model on or something like this, and in the model I don't get the string, I get template, but I still don't want to do ons.
That's not really supported. There's not really a good way to do that. Probably the best thing you could do is to pass in the constituent components. So basically, you could get one of three things with an attribute. I don't love this, but it's just the current implementation, and I was being pragmatic to get the implementation done. I acknowledge it could be better. If something is something that like doesn't have a racer equivalent or just like a literal string, so basically if something's a literal value, like if you pass in either pi or you pass in some expression in curlies that can be immediately reduced to a literal, like curly curly 24, you'll actually get like literally the number 24, because that's just a literal. It's not going to change. So that will be set in the model as the literal value. But if what you pass in is like a simple path, so either like if it's like something dot something, what will happen is you'll get a racer reference will be set up automatically, and that also happens if you do like square brackets. It creates a reference if it can, in most cases. But there's some things that like can't create references because they're like Derby and they don't have a racer equivalent. Like if you have like a full-on like template defined in your curlies. So that's why sometimes you get these objects that are like template objects, is like there just isn't a racer equivalent for them. And there's not a way to react to those. So in an ideal world, the way that this would work is that in the model, we'd actually like update a value, but like Derby would do it. Like Derby would use the same bindings logic that it uses to update views to update the model, and then you could listen to the model. That would, or like there'd be some method that would let you set that up somehow, maybe. Like similar to how model ref sets up this part of the model that gets updated based on another model, there could be a method that would like say, similar to ref, where you'd say like, make this template update this model, and then that would basically be like the equivalent to ref. Or maybe Derby could even extend ref to do this, actually. I don't know. But that's just a limitation of the framework at this point. We're starting to get into it's still not like 100% complete in that way. So basically, my recommendation would be use get attribute, but pass in the things that are changing as separate attributes if you have to, and then you can model on those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer, but yes, this is specifically like the biggest fundamental part of Derby that's still kind of half-baked. Is there's this like bindings layer that's like not super well connected to the model, because it's really, I got as far as like making it do a good job of updating the DOM, but didn't figure out how to like connect that to the model and the model's event system. There's currently like two completely different event systems for like Derby bindings and for the model, and they obviously should have a little bit more interaction, and it should have something to do with bindings, and I still, there's like an impedance mismatch that is obvious, but actually kind of a tricky fundamental thing that needs to be figured out. This will all get simpler in the future. I haven't figured out how, but it's very clear that it could be better. Obviously,
maybe instead of the reference, it can be a model start that gets automatically built up, like to parse the expression with a schema, and you somehow create the function that you run in model start instead of doing a reference.
Yeah, so you could do something like that, and actually there's a way of like asking for the dependencies for a thing, and I could write a bunch of hacky code to like always update the model, but the problem with doing that is mostly like then in your view it's less efficient, because it's more efficient for the view to actually just get the template object, because then it can like set up all the bindings correctly. So there needs to be some way of explicitly telling the framework like, hey, update this model with this template, and bind all of like its results. And maybe I should just, as a quick hack, add a method that does what I'm saying, basically. But it feels really inelegant, and it feels like it could be more baked in than that. But maybe that's like a temporary solution.
Well, it would be great if it can be done quickly as a temporary solution, because currently we ran into this issue more than once, and we had to create like either, as you said, to pass everything into the
I recognize
separately.
The other solution you can use, although also really non-ideal, is you can wrap everything in an on, and then like re-render the entire component that's doing whatever. But obviously that has its own problems, like it's expensive, and also if you have state, like, you know, if you're re-rendering a whole form, right, like, and somebody's like typing in a box, like that's a disaster. You can't do that. So the on hack is often the simplest hack because it's just like, oh, just re-render the whole thing and then it's fine. But obviously that has its limitations, and like sometimes it's not performance enough. So yeah, I hear you. I'll think on it a little more. You guys are pretty quickly hitting my like. This is funny. Like these two things are actually like this and the component and page situation is like the two things that really bother me right now about Derby. It's like so. I'll think about it.
Cool. Well, I think we have plenty to think about for this week.
Yeah. Deep office hours this week.
Yeah, good one. Lots of exciting announcements last week, and this week some great questions and ideas.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I'm mostly working on share performance still for probably the next week, but these are good things to bring up and things that have been bothering me for a long time. So I very much agree with you. We'll get to the bottom of it.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're already a little over time, so we'll cut it off here. But we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks,
everybody.
Nice.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Right.